You are listening to Gangland Wire, hosted by former Kansas City Police Intelligence Unit Detective Gary Jenkins.
Welcome, all you wiretappers out there, back here in the studio of Gangland Wire. I have a really interesting story today. I stumbled across a book, or maybe somebody got hold of me. Anyhow, I found out a book about Sonny Franzese, and I always was curious about him. I did a small show on him when he died. I believe he was the oldest living gangster that was in penitentiary, and then got out and died at like 103. And he's just an interesting guy. You know, we all know that Michael Franzese, his son, has a really popular YouTube show, and he's got his fingers in all kinds of businesses. He had a big fight with Sammy the Bull Gravano, if you want to believe that big fight. You know what I always thought? What if these mob guys, there's so many mob guys with podcasts and YouTube channels, what if one of them like gets mad at the other and he puts a hit out on it because he thinks the guy is moving in on his business or something else? I mean, does that be light imitating art, right? Sandra Peddie, welcome. She is the author of The Last Old Time Mafia Bosses. Oh, the last of the old time mafia bosses, Sonny Franzese. Sonny is the actual title, and you can see it over her shoulder there. And folks, here is, you're on YouTube, there it is. So anyhow, welcome, Sandra.
And thank you. And by the way, if you look at the book, it's by S.J. Peddie, not Sandra Peddie, because my editor has never edited a mob book by a woman, and he wasn't sure it would sell.
Oh, interesting. You know, I wonder, when I saw that S.J., I'm thinking back to the old authors. I can't even think of them back in the 1800s, where they would have a name that didn't indicate they were a woman. I can't think of their names now.
Like there are a lot of them. Yeah. Well, I'm one of them now.
You're one of them now. And this is 2022.
It is indeed.
You know, I understand you are the second woman that I've ever interviewed, and I've interviewed a lot of mob authors. Of course, a lot of them are former agents, but I did have one former FBI agent who was female, or is female, who worked the case, and I think, I had one of my friends in the police department who worked undercover narcotics for a long time, so I interviewed her. But in that author business with mob books, only Debbie Applegate, who wrote the story of Polly Adler, who was a madam in the 1930s and 40s, and knew a lot of mob guys. So welcome, Sandra. It's good to have you.
Thank you.
So Sonny Franzese, I guess. I remember hearing about him when I was working intelligence, and he had some connection to some credit card scam business that had some outlying business in suburban Kansas City. And I thought, wow, that sounds like a pretty cool guy. and you know, this mob guys, we'd never see him in Kansas City, but I remember we went out to this business and wrote down some license numbers and went in the building to see if it was actually there. You know, and I don't remember anything more about it, but he just, you know, you talk about, he just got a cool name, you know, kind of like Sammy the Bull, you know, John Gotti, you know.
Well, Sonny was one of the things that set Sonny apart was that he was a real entrepreneur. He was a businessman. And he had his tentacles in everything: credit cards, banks, liquor distributors, popular music. He had his own theatrical agency. Sonny was everywhere. And in the 60s, the mafia was at its peak.
Yeah, especially there in New York City.
Right.
I've been watching this thing. I just finally got around to seeing it about the Deuce. It's called The Deuce, and how the mob was just totally controlled that all the porn and bar scene and everything in New York City. And as I mentioned, as I read through your book, what really struck me was about the music business, that he had his fingers in the music business. Now, I have this podcast I listen to called The History of Rock and Roll in 500 Songs. By the way, if you are interested in popular music, this is a heck of a good podcast. It's not a commercial podcast. It's a guy like me that does all of his own research, and he's able to snag little snippets of songs under the fair use doctrine, why he's able to use little snippets of the songs. But anyhow, he was talking about the Peppermint Lounge and how that was a mob run operation, and Joey D and the Starlighters popularized the twist after Chubby Checker did, and this guy that I know is in your book, Morris Levy, jumped onto that and signed this guy to his, is it Roulette Records?
It was Roulette Records, right?
And really popularized the twist nationwide. So there was a mob influence in this huge dance craze and the change of rock and roll, and Sonny Franzese was all over that. So let's talk a little bit about, I think maybe an overview from you about his place in what family and everything in the mob, and then let's go into his connections in the music business. How about that, Sandra?
Well, that sounds fine. Sonny was born in Naples, and his family came to New York in the 1920s as in one of these big immigration surges. And he was inducted into the mafia at the age of 14. And of course, to be inducted, you had to kill someone.
Really?
And then he was a soldier in what was then known as the Profaci family. But he was a very smart kid. He got kicked out of school at 15 because he got into a fight with a kid over a stolen lighter and beat him to a pulp. So he then started running bookmaking operations for the mafia. And by the 18, he was running the biggest gambling operation in the city. He then moved on to other businesses. He was close to Albert Anastasia, Vito Genovese. They all were impressed by this up and comer, and he worked his way up through the ranks. He was a very loyal soldier. How did I come to talk to him? He was 100 years old when he was released from prison, and he had at one point been one of the wealthiest mobsters in the country. He would take his family for vacations on the Concorde. He would have Kool and the Gang over at his house. He socialized with Diane Carroll, Dionne Warwick. He was huge. And when I met him at age 101, he was in a nursing home with one kidney, a pacemaker, one eye, a broken hip, in a wheelchair, but still full of zest for life. He was an amazing guy. And he started to tell his story, but he never, ever once violated Omerta. At one time I said to him, Sonny, did FBI agents try to get you to violate Omerta? He goes, what's that? What are you talking about?
You gotta like that.
Very cagey guy, very cagey.
Yeah, and you know they did. Every mob guy I ever knew personally, they'll visit you in prison periodically and say, hey, how's it going? You know, just here's my card just in case.
And that's exactly what they did. And he said they used to come to him in prison all the time, and he'd say, nope, not interested.
Yeah.
But that's what made Sonny so revered on the street, is he never rolled. He was sentenced to prison for 50 years for a bank robbery conspiracy he said he wasn't guilty of. And to his dying days, he said, I didn't do it.
Yeah.
And he told the judge when he was sentenced in 1967, he said, you watch, I'll do the whole bid. And he came out.
Yeah.
And that for him was winning. You know, outliving all his antagonists, the prosecutors, the judge, the cops. He thought he was winning. And in my last interview, which was right before his 103rd birthday, he was trying to tell me he was 104. I said, Sonny, you're really 103, but it's okay. And he was very sharp. He was a very disciplined guy, never drank, never smoked, never got involved in any kind of drugs. He was very, and you know how in the movies you see these luncheons that mobsters have, wine-fueled lunches with pasta and all that. You know, he would have a date nut bread sandwich for lunch, and he would just eat on the run. He was a real focused businessman.
Well, hence maybe the secret of his longevity. My mother lived to be about 104, and she kind of ate like that herself, and was just thin as a rail her whole life. So we all could take a lesson from that, couldn't we?
Well, it also has something to do with his genes, I'm sure. But he was very proud of it. Yeah. And he never drank. When he joined the Army, he had to give up sugar in his coffee. And I said, so Sonny, when was the last time you had sugar? He said, 1942.
Wow. Man.
But he loved, the other thing that made Sonny stand apart was he loved the nightlife. He loved the glamour. And whenever mobsters do perp walks, if you look at the old photos, they're all covering their faces. You look at Carmine Persco, he's got a coat over his face. Sonny never covered his face. He would stop, he would turn his head, and he would smile. And it was always had a cashmere overcoat, cufflinks, French cuffs, beautifully dressed. He looked good, and he knew it. And he parlayed that. He was very popular at the Copacabana, which of course, I'm sure your listeners know that Frank Costello was a silent partner in the Copacabana.
Right. I knew there was a big mob connection to it. I have some vague memory. I'm really going into that. So that's interesting. But I knew mobsters all felt comfortable at the Copa.
Oh, yes, they absolutely did. And I don't know if you remember Gianni Russo, who played Carlo in The Godfather.
Yeah.
He used to be a runner, I think, for Costello. So he was at the Copacabana all the time, and he remembered seeing Sonny there. But of course, he was too low to approach Sonny, so he never did. But it was, and celebrities would go there to meet mobsters. It was really a melting pot, and it was the kind of place. The guy who ran it was Jules Podell. He wasn't on the license because he had a felony record, but he was a stickler for detail. And so, for example, he would not let unescorted women come to the Copacabana. And Sonny's wife, Tina, who was beautiful and elegant and always beautifully dressed, she would go to the club because Sonny would always go in the back door through the kitchen. Tina would go separately. And because she was Tina Franzese, the doorman would walk her straight to Sonny's table. And this, the doorman told me, I mean, this is not apocryphal. This is straight from the Copacabana doorman.
Primary source. We like those primary sources.
Yeah, there are a lot of primary sources in this one. So, and he loved it. And I said to him at one point, I said, Sonny, where did you sit when you went to the Copa? And he looked at me and he said, wherever I wanted. And he wasn't bragging, he was just stating the facts. And if the club was full, they would put a table on the stage. And that, of course, Sonny knew Frank Sinatra. He was very close to Frank Sinatra. He knew Frank Sinatra when he was a young and up-and-coming singer. He had helped him out in a bar fight at the Rustic Lodge in upstate New York. And of course, as Sinatra got to be bigger, he expected people to defer to him. And Sonny, I said to Sonny, I said, so did you know Frank Sinatra? And he said, you asked the question the wrong way. You should have asked, did Frank Sinatra know Sonny Franzese? And he said one night he was walking through the club and Sinatra was yelling, Sonny, Sonny. He was behind him.
Yeah.
And Sonny pretended he didn't hear him, just to put him in his place.
That's a good story.
He also described, remember Ava Gardner, with whom Frank Sinatra was hopelessly in love.
Yeah.
She used to come to the Copa to watch him perform. And one night he started talking with her, started flirting, and they had a little makeout session in a room behind the bar. They didn't go to bed. And she was one of the few women Sonny did not claim to bed, but he was very proud of his little makeout session with her, which he described in detail. So.
Even at 103.
Oh, yeah. And at one point, when the videographer I was with got up and left the table, he turned to me and he said, say, you married? I said, yes, honey, I'm married. He goes, oh, too bad. I'd take you out to lunch when I get out of
here. Sandra, that was a question I was going to ask. Now did he flirt with you? Being an attractive woman? Oh,
absolutely. Bear in mind, he was in a wheelchair and needed help going to the bathroom. But Sonny was Sonny.
Really?
So, yeah. He loved life, and he was an unabashed bad guy. He owned a lot of clubs, and he said, but never in my name. And I said, well, why is that? And he said, because I was a bad guy. So he also met Jane Mansfield at the Copacabana and describes a very torrid affair with Jane Mansfield.
Really?
Yes. But it seemed to have settled down because then he met Marilyn Monroe.
Yeah.
but he met her at the Stork Club. And they, he said, had an affair. And that led to the only time, and I interviewed Sonny 6 times, the only time he ever expressed any remorse was, remember the night of the Democratic convention where Marilyn Monroe came out and sang happy birthday to Jack Kennedy in this shimmery gown that was skin tight?
Yeah, Mr. President.
Yes. Well, Sonny and Joe DiMaggio were there on the main floor. And DiMaggio, by then, Monroe and DiMaggio were apart, but DiMaggio was chasing Sonny around the floor, Sonny believed, to confront him about the affair. And Sonny, who wasn't afraid of anyone, he couldn't face him because DiMaggio was his childhood hero.
Yeah.
He couldn't talk to him.
Interesting. He is a human being. I always like it when we show the human side of these mythical mobsters to find the human side of them. That's a great one.
Yeah.
Interesting. Now you mentioned that, and it was in your book about he had a relationship with Bobby Darin, who was, you know, he was huge at the time. He didn't live out his life but Bobby Darin. And did he manage him, or was they just friends?
Well, no. Bobby Darin, as you pointed out, the music industry, the mafia was huge in the music industry in the 60s. And Roulette Records, run by Mo Levy, was affiliated with the Genovese family. Right. And so Darin initially was with the Genovese family. Mo Levy gave Darin to Sonny.
Interesting.
And that meant that Darin had to presumably make payments to him, and Sonny would help his career. And Sonny, he did act as a manager. He would get people into clubs. And can you imagine if Sonny Franzese said, "I want you to put my singer on your stage"? Are you going to say no?
Yeah.
So he was, and he really liked Darin. He loved Bobby Darin. At one point, he said to me in the first interview, he said he realized, I think, that I could be helpful to him. And he said, "What's your name? Is it Samantha?" And I said, "No, Sandra, like Sandra D." And he said, "Oh, Sandra D, lovely girl, but she couldn't sing." And so he really liked Darin and Sandra D. And Sonny was a real music fan. He loved talent, but he also understood that talent could make him money. But he was a genuine music fan. And in his view, Darin was a better singer than Frank Sinatra. And the two of them hated each other. And Sinatra particularly hated Darin because he knew he was a threat, because Darin could hit notes that Sinatra couldn't. And that was Sonny. That was Sonny's observation.
I have to go back and listen to Beyond the Sea again one more time. Think about that.
Or Mac the Knife.
Mac the Knife, yeah. He had a lot of good ones. Now, Sandra, tell us a little bit more about Mo Levy, or Morris Levy.
Morris,
I looked him up a little bit, but I can't remember exactly what it was. He was connected to the Genovese. I remember that.
Yes, he was a street kid who grew up, and he was connected with the Genovese family. A big guy. He had hands like catcher mitts, according to Tommy James. Do you remember Tommy James and the Shondells?
Yeah. I knew he was. He's got a book, something about the mob and the music business. So
right. Well, I interviewed Tommy about this, and so Roulette signed Tommy James and the Shondells, but Levy was a big gambler, big gambler, and he was married, I think, 4 times, and he liked to buy his wives, horses and houses. So he spent the money as soon as it came in.
Yeah. And
so he was a tough businessman to deal with, but he had a good ear for talent. And one day, in fact, Sonny told me this story. Do you remember the song "Leader of the Laundromat"? Or no, I'm sorry, "Leader of the Pack."
Leader of the Pack, yeah.
Right. Well, a novelty group in the 60s, novelty groups were huge. And there was a novelty group called the Detergents. And the songwriter, Paul Vance, who also wrote "Catch a Falling Star," he wrote a parody of "Leader of the Laundromat," Leader of the Pack, called "Leader of the Laundromat." And it's hilarious. If you listen to it online, it's just hilarious. It sold 900,000 copies.
Wow.
And Vance understandably wanted his royalties. The detergents, who were younger teenage singers, they knew enough to just say, whatever you say, Morris. But Vance challenged him. Levy, at that point, he was down to his last $10,000. He needed the money, and he told them the records all came back. So they didn't make any money. And Vance got mad, and he slugged him. And Sonny was there with his guys, and Sonny yelled, the window, you dumb bastard. And they hung him out the window.
Oh.
And they said, you give Morris what he wants. And Vance said, you got it. So he did, and they pulled Roulette out of insolvency. And after that, Paul Vance and Sonny Franzese became fast friends.
Oh,
because, and Sonny's compatriots said, why are you being good to this guy? He said, you know who that guy is? He's won 29 gold records.
Yeah.
He can make us money. And Vance liked Sonny because Sonny was always straight with him. He never lied to him. And that's one of the things that you hear everyone who did business with Sonny. They said he was a straight shooter. You knew who he was. He didn't try to lie to you. And that's that. And by the way, this hanging out the window routine.
Yeah, that's like in mob lore, and you see that in all kinds of movies and stuff where they hang a guy out the window by his ankle. So it really happened. That's how it got started, huh?
Right. It's not lore. It happened.
Right.
And at one time, Mo Levy, or maybe it was another guy in the business, they were mad at a particular songwriter. And so they sent some hoods over to talk some sense into him because he was holding out. Mm-hmm. And they hung him out the window. But guess what?
Oh, no.
No, they didn't drop him.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to say they dropped him.
No, this guy was a twin. They got the wrong guy.
Oh.
So it was an occupational hazard in the 60s for singers and songwriters.
Business. Wow. They really had their hooks into it big time. I didn't realize it was that deep into it, and those big name groups. Wow.
Oh, absolutely.
So I'm trying to think. In this music business, in the club business, how did he deal with especially like payoffs for police and that kind of thing, whatever they have in liquor control? Did he have all that wired pretty good?
Oh, he did. And of course, in the 30s and 40s and early 50s, that was just a cost of doing business.
Yeah.
And when he was, I guess 1938 was Sonny's first arrest for assault, and he went on to have a dozen more arrests. But because there was all these payoffs, he never took a hit. All the charges were thrown out, or he was acquitted. And the same thing was true for the clubs. And in fact, that's why he told friends, that's why he moved out to Long Island in the early 1960s, because he got sick of paying bribes to all the NYPD cops and the liquor authority and all that. And Long Island was virgin territory. So he went at it on Long Island and made millions, absolutely millions.
Now, did he ever get into porn as the mob
He did.
moved into porn?
He did. And it was a source of embarrassment to him. He did not want people to know that he was involved in porn because, it's unseemly. You shouldn't make money off women.
Yeah.
But actually in the early 1960s, when Times Square was really a porn haven, Sonny was walking through Times Square, and he was struck not by all the pornographic signs, but by all the men in line waiting to put their quarters into these machines where women would strip for them, or where they would put quarters into machines and look at these pornographic loops. Yeah. And so he moved in on, in particular, there was a guy named Marty Hodis. He called himself the porn king of Times Square. And he had been in the jukebox business and then moved into doing these loops and these live sex shows. And Sonny moved in, and the way these guys move in, and I'm sure you know this, you're much more knowledgeable than I, but it was interesting for me to hear this, but First, he would befriend his target.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, a few weeks later, a problem would erupt. And then his friend would have to turn to Sonny for some help. And of course,
Right.
that help cost money.
Yeah.
And so in the case of Marty Hodis, some thugs picked up his 6-year-old son on the way home from school.
Ooh.
And he was missing for hours. They took him to buy ice cream. They didn't hurt him.
Yeah.
But then they dropped him off with a note on his shirt saying, "Hey, how you doing, Marty?" Then they tried to do the same thing with his 12-year-old daughter, but Romola, his daughter, was a lot tougher. Ultimately, they started coming to his house and shots were exchanged. It's unclear who shot whom. Nobody got killed, but Marty wound up turning over half his business to Sonny Franzese.
Wow.
And that was in a note. That's documented in a note. This is not apocryphal. And later, the way the government would get pornographers like Marty was they didn't pay their taxes.
Mm-hmm.
So Marty went on trial for tax evasion. And he said he really wasn't lying about his income because he had to give half of it to Sonny Franzese. So he really wasn't lying on his taxes. But the argument didn't fly, and Marty was convicted of tax fraud.
Huh. Well, that is a heck of a story. That's playing hardball. I mean, I've heard of that before. I've even was kind of experienced it, or not on myself, but I saw it happen, and that's exactly how it works. All of a sudden, you got a problem, and then the mob guy comes by and says, I can help you with those guys. They're hard heads. They're just young guys. They're kind of out of control. I can help you with them. And there's just what it's going to cost you. This was a guy trying to move in on a strip club owner to get a piece of his action, and he did. He really did. So, and it works, boy, grab somebody's kid. Whew, that's serious business there.
Now, Sonny was hardcore. There was a guy, Sal Polisi, who knew all the guys on his crew. He wrote a book called The Sinatra Club. He knew all these guys. But I talked to Sal, and he told me a story about how Sonny sold his car to a car dealership. And the car salesman said to the buyer, the guy buying the car, "Listen, you better get this swept for bugs because it was owned by a hood named Sonny Franzese." Well, Sonny was not happy about that.
Huh.
4 thugs went to the car dealership and beat the man with bats, leaving him permanently handicapped after that day. Now, did Sonny order it, or was it people who wanted to establish their bona fides? Yeah. Who knows?
Yeah.
But Sal was pretty convinced that it was Sonny.
Yeah, well, it's that's one thing I find fascinating about these guys, and like I said, I've known some of them personally, and they can have these personalities, outgoing, friendly personalities, but yet you hear about some of these other actions. They have families. Their kids in Kansas City, they all went to St. Pius, a high school there, and they're all part of a community, or that community where they live, and but yet on the other hand, you've got this other kind of a life that they live when they get over to the city. and like, it's a whole different person. That's one thing I always found fascinating about these guys. And it sounds like he is exactly like that.
Well, you're absolutely right. And an FBI agent I interviewed who listened to hours of wiretaps with Sonny, he said to me, "Look, there's a duality with wise guys. They, on the one hand," and he said, Sonny could be talking about, "Gee, you should use this kind of marble in your club." And then a minute later, talk about how to dispose of a body.
Yeah.
It's a kind of duality that the rest of us in the civilian world don't really understand.
It's tough. I think as a policeman, somewhat lives like that sometimes when you work over in the city, but you live out in the suburbs, and you're like, myself, I was like, a little league coach and, part of that community on one hand, but you go over to the city, and I have people say, "Well, I just can't see you being a policeman." I said, "Well, you never saw me at work, did you?" I understand that duality. Mob guys, they go a little further with their duality. So I guess, Sandra, what would be like your favorite story out of your book? Tell my guys what would be one of your favorite little vignettes out of your book.
I think actually, and this is not a funny vignette, it's not, but I asked Sonny about all the years he spent in prison. And I said, do you worry about what it did to your family? And that was another case where he said, yes, that's what I regret, is what it did to my family. And do you know his family did not know that? I spoke to his sons after that, Michael and John, and they had never heard him ever express any regret about the life, that he really felt a deep sadness about what the life did to his family. He never took any responsibility for choosing to be a part of that life, but he did feel bad about that. So he was a very fully formed human being.
Yeah. Well, interesting. All right. The book is Sonny.
Oh.
Sonny.
Thank you for doing that. I keep forgetting to mention the book.
I know.
And it's on Amazon right now.
Okay.
It is, the hardback will be out March 30th. And again, look for Sonny by S.J. Peddie and you'll find it. Yeah, I know.
All right. Well, we will get this up sometime in the next month or so, 6 weeks. I'm kind of like scheduling out ahead, doing the interviews, all the interviews I can for summer, so I can play more golf in the summer and do less of this.
What's your handicap?
Oh, it's like 20 maybe, if I'm lucky on a good
so
day.
You need to play more golf.
I need to. Oh yeah. I need to play a lot more. I didn't start till I was middle-aged, so I didn't exactly grow up on a golf course at a country club. I grew up on the farm. So Sandra, I really appreciate you coming on here, and I will I'll put links up to the Amazon on the show notes, folks, and they all know that. And
well, thank you.
I'll send you an email whenever I put it up with the links to the YouTube and the audio podcast.
And you know what? I'll send you links to my YouTube documentary.
Oh, okay. Yeah, good.
It might be fun. And there probably are other stories. I never have a favorite story because I always fall in love with the next story. And it's true. And Sonny was just such a multifaceted character. You've met wise guys. I've met wise guys. I'm not impressed by most of them. Most of them are just predators and thugs.
Yeah.
But Sonny was the kind of guy who could pass in civilian life. And that's what made him interesting. And that's why the mafia is interesting. Other ethnic groups haven't insinuated themselves into civilian life the way the mafia did. Right. And has, and still does.
And still does, yeah. And their kids become, the doctors and lawyers many times. But yet they may have the one cousin that kind of maintains the life too. Even to this day is what I'm seeing.
Exactly. No, the mafia has not gone away. The FBI did a very intelligent, concerted push against the mafia in the 80s and did a lot of damage. But but they haven't gone away.
No. Yeah, when that RICO, when they started really getting sophisticated with their Title III, with the wiretaps and bugs and could use the RICO law, and it decimated the mafia in the 80s.
Which reminds me of my favorite story. This actually is my favorite story about Sonny, and then I'll get off. When RICO was passed, that was when the Witness Protection Program was started.
Yeah, that too. Yeah.
Do you know why WITSEC was started?
Not if there was like a genesis kind of moment. I don't know that story. So
the genesis moment was Sonny Franzese.
Oh, really?
There was a trucker on Long Island who had a very profitable business. And Sonny, as it was his wont, if he saw a profitable business, he wanted to move in. So he sent some guys over to the trucker's office and said, Sonny wants half your business. And the trucker laughed. He said, no, I don't need his help. The next day he finds sand in his carburetor. Yeah. And the day after that, some of his trucks are damaged. And on the third day, 4 thugs show up in his office, beat him with baseball bats. He's in the hospital. He signed over half the business to Sonny Franzese. He was so upset, he went to an IRS agent who spoke with Gerald Schur, who is the guy who really pushed for a program to protect witnesses. Mm-hmm. And that became the genesis of the Witness Protection Program. Years later, when Sonny's favorite son, John, wore a wire against him and later testified against him, John went into that Witness Protection Program.
Came full circle, didn't it?
Yes, that's a good, you just distilled it. You distilled it perfectly.
Well, there's a certain symmetry to that, isn't there?
Yeah.
We like things that are symmetrical. They're at least I do. All right, Sandra, this is great. Folks, make sure you
Thank
get
you.
this book. Thanks a lot for coming on the show.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
And play some golf.
Yeah, really. Hey guys, thanks for listening to this episode of Gangland Wire. Now, don't forget to like and subscribe down below if you're on YouTube. Now, I've started on YouTube, as you all have noticed, I would imagine. If you're on an audio platform like the Apple Podcast app, you can give me a review there. I appreciate that. You can also support the making of each episode by buying me a shot and a beer on your Venmo app. If you have Venmo, that's at Gangland Wire. I have a new way, buy me a cup of coffee. There's a link in the show notes to buy me a cup of coffee or two. You can go to my website. You can see all my books and movies that are for sale, or you can donate via your credit card on the PayPal button, or if you have a PayPal account. And if you donate enough, why, you start getting those books and movies in a coffee cup or a t-shirt or whatever you want. And remember, if you or a friend are suffering from PTSD, check out the Veterans Administration resources. Just go to Google and Google PTSD and Veterans Administration, or VA, and you'll find that website. And you'll find there's a hotline and there's links there to help you find resources to deal with that problem. And remember, look out for motorcycles on the road and stay safe. Bye, folks.
Music provided by our good friend and super fan from Portland, Oregon, Casey McBride. Thanks, Casey.